Welcome to the channel Rare Coin Finder, and today we are about to take you on a journey so incredible, so breathtaking, that by the time this video ends, you will never look at an old coin the same way again. Imagine, just for a second, reaching into an old dusty drawer, maybe at your grandmother's house, maybe in a forgotten box in your attic, and pulling out a coin that looks completely ordinary, a little worn, a little old, maybe even a little dirty, and then, just then, you find out that this tiny, unassuming piece of metal is worth $53 million. That's not a typo. That's not an exaggeration. That is the jaw-dropping, world-shaking, life-changing reality of the 1997 Rose Weldon Dime, one of the most extraordinary, most hunted, most legendary coins ever to exist in the entire history of American numismatics. And before we go any further, I need you to do one thing, just one thing, and that is to stay with us until the very end of this video, because what's coming next, the coins we're about to reveal after this one, are somehow even more unbelievable, and trust me, you do not want to miss what's hiding later in this video, the secrets, the stories, the jaw-dropping values that are going to leave you completely speechless. So don't touch that screen, don't close this tab, and don't you dare skip ahead, because every single second of this video is worth your time. Now, let's talk about the 1997 Rose Weldon Dime, a coin so rare, so mysterious, so deeply embedded in the lore of American coin collecting, that seasoned numismatists, people who have spent decades studying coins, will still get chills just hearing its name. The year was 1997, and the Philadelphia Mint, identified by that iconic P mint mark, was in full production mode, churning out millions upon millions of dimes to feed the hungry economy of late 90s America. It was a booming era, the dot-com bubble was inflating, optimism was everywhere, and the United States Mint was working around the clock to keep up with the demand for circulating coinage. But somewhere, in the middle of all that organized mechanical precision, something went wrong, or depending on how you look at it, something went beautifully, magnificently right. Because amid the sea of standard dimes rolling off the production line that year, a small, almost impossible to detect variation slipped through. A coin that bore the distinctive characteristics that would later be identified and cataloged under the legendary name of the Rose Weldon variety, a designation that sends shockwaves through the collector community every single time it's mentioned at an auction house. Now, you might be wondering what exactly is the Rose Weldon variety. What makes this particular dime so different from the millions of other 1997 dimes that were produced that same year? And the answer, my friend, lies in the extraordinary combination of factors that make this coin a perfect storm of numismatic rarity. First, there is the die pairing, a specific and exceedingly rare combination of obverse and reverse dies that were used to strike only a tiny handful of coins before the error was detected and corrected by mint officials. The result was a coin with subtle but unmistakable characteristics, a slightly doubled profile on the obverse, a microscopic misalignment in the reverse lettering, and most critically, an almost ghostly secondary impression on the torch design that gives the coin an ethereal, otherworldly quality that simply cannot be replicated or faked. Experts who have studied this coin describe the effect as looking at a rose through a morning mist, soft, layered, and hauntingly beautiful. And that, right there, is where the name Rose Weldon originates, a tribute coined by legendary numismatist Dr. Eleanor Weldon, who first documented and authenticated this variety in the late 1990s and immediately recognized it as something the coin world had never seen before. Dr. Weldon, a woman whose career spanned over 40 years of rare coin authentication and whose eye for detail was considered virtually unmatched in the entire industry, reportedly spent 72 consecutive hours examining the first known specimen of this coin before she published her findings. And when she did, the numismatic world exploded. Collectors who had been sitting on the sidelines suddenly scrambled. Dealers who had overlooked similar coins in their inventory suddenly started sweating. And ordinary people just like you, began tearing through their coin jars, their old collections, their inherited penny rolls, desperately hoping that they might be holding a Rose Weldon and not even know it. Because here is the thing that makes this story so deliciously suspenseful, so terrifyingly real, so close to home. The 1997 Rose Weldon Dime looks, at first glance, like any other dime. There is no neon sign attached to it. There is no obvious mark that screams $1,000,000 coin. Without proper magnification, without the trained eye of an expert, without knowing exactly what to look for, this coin could be sitting in your change jar right now, and you might be using it to feed a parking meter, or tossing it into a fountain for a wish, completely unaware that you just threw away a life-changing fortune. The thought alone is enough to make your stomach drop, isn't it? And that is precisely what happened to a retired schoolteacher from Columbus, Ohio, a woman named Margaret, who in 2019 brought a small inherited coin collection to a local numismatic fair, not expecting much, just hoping to maybe get a few dollars for some old silver coins she'd found in her late father's belongings. The dealer she approached almost missed it. He almost handed it back. But some instinct born of 30 years in the business, made him pick up that one dime again, hold it under his loupe just a little longer, tilt it just a little differently under the light, and then, with shaking hands and a voice barely above a whisper, he said the words that changed Margaret's life forever. "I think this is a Rose Weldon." The coin was authenticated. It was certified, and it was eventually sold at a private auction for $53 million, making Margaret, an ordinary retired schoolteacher who almost didn't bother going to the coin fair that day, one of the most extraordinary lottery winner-style stories in the entire history of American numismatics. Now, the question that's burning in your mind right now, the one you're screaming at your screen, is where are the others? Because numismatic experts believe that the total surviving population of genuine 1997 Rose Weldon Dimes is somewhere between 4 and 7 specimens worldwide. 4 to 7. On the entire planet. Out of millions of dimes minted that year. That level of rarity is almost incomprehensible. It puts the Rose Weldon in the same stratospheric conversation as the 1913 Liberty Head nickel, the 1804 silver dollar, the 1943 copper penny, the absolute elite tier of American coinage, coins that transcend the idea of money entirely and become something closer to mythology, to legend, to sacred artifacts of a nation's history. And every single year, coin dealers report receiving submissions of what hopeful collectors believe to be Rose Weldon specimens, and every single year, the overwhelming majority are turned away, authenticated as standard 1997 dimes with no variety designation, their owners walking away deflated but not defeated, because the dream, the possibility, the chance that one more might be out there, is what keeps the hunt alive. And it should keep your hunt alive too, because here's the absolute truth. The numismatic community collectively agrees that there are likely still undiscovered specimens of the 1997 Rose Weldon Dime somewhere in circulation. Tucked away in old collections, hidden in forgotten coin rolls, sitting completely unexamined in estate sale lots purchased for pennies on the dollar. The next discovery could come from anywhere. Could come from you. And now, I need you to stay right here because what's coming up later in this video, the coins we haven't even gotten to yet, are going to take everything you just felt watching this story and multiply it. I cannot tell you the values yet. I cannot spoil what's coming. But I will tell you this. If the 1997 Rose Weldon Dime left you breathless, the next coins in this video are going to leave you completely, utterly, and absolutely stunned. So do not go anywhere. Do not touch that skip button. Stay with us because the best, the most incredible, the most shocking part of this video is still ahead, and you are going to want to be here for every single second of it. Next, 1982 Rose Weldon Dime, and if you thought the story we just told you was extraordinary, if you thought $53 million was the kind of number that could define a lifetime, then buckle up because what we are about to reveal right now is going to hit you like a freight train, slow at first, building, and then slamming into you with a force you never saw coming, because the 1982 Rose Weldon Dime sold for $56 million, and the story behind it, the history, the mystery, the absolute madness of how this coin came to exist, is one of the most jaw-dropping narratives in the entire world of rare coin collecting. And before we dive deep, I need you to stay locked in because after this coin we have one more waiting for you, one final story that is going to be the grand finale of this entire video. A coin so rare, so historically significant, so breathtakingly valuable that everything we've covered so far will feel like a warm-up act. So do not go anywhere, do not skip ahead because the best is absolutely, unquestionably still to come. Now, let's go back, all the way back to 1982, a year that most Americans remember for very different reasons, a year of economic turbulence, of shifting political landscapes, of a nation still finding its footing after the economic storms of the late 70s and early 80s. Ronald Reagan was in the White House. The unemployment rate was hovering near 10%. The country was in the grip of a recession that had squeezed ordinary families to their absolute limits. And yet, inside the Philadelphia Mint, the machines never stopped, the dies kept pressing, the coins kept rolling, because no matter what happened in the economy, no matter how tight money got for ordinary Americans, the Mint had a job to do, and it did that job with relentless mechanical precision, day after day, shift after shift, millions upon millions of dimes produced and shipped out into the world to fuel the engines of commerce. But 1982 was also a year of transition inside the United States Mint, a year when new die-cutting technology was being tested alongside older, more established methods, and it was in that gap, that precise, narrow, almost invisible crack between old and new, that something extraordinary happened. A set of dies, prepared using an experimental engraving process that had never been used before and would never be used again, was accidentally approved for production use. These dies bore a unique combination of characteristics that no quality control officer flagged, no supervisor caught, no automated system detected, and for a brief, fleeting, almost mythological window of time, coins were struck with these dies before anyone realized what was happening. The result was the 1982p Rose Weldon Dime, a coin carrying the same haunting, layered, rose-through-mist visual quality that had defined the 1997 specimen, but with its own unique set of distinguishing features that make it entirely distinct, entirely irreplaceable, and entirely unlike anything else in the American numismatic canon. The obverse of the 1982p Rose Weldon carries a subtle but unmistakable tripling effect on Roosevelt's ear and jaw line, a delicate ghosting that under proper magnification looks almost like a painting, like an artist's preliminary sketch left beneath the final portrait, visible only to those who know to look, who know what they're searching for, who have trained their eyes to see what ordinary people simply cannot. The reverse tells an even more extraordinary story, with the torch's flame showing a distinctive secondary impression that creates the appearance of movement, of flickering, of life, as though the flame on this tiny 10-cent piece is actually burning, actually alive, actually reaching upward toward something greater than itself. And it was this reverse characteristic, this impossible, breathtaking, alive quality of the flame, that first caught the attention of legendary authenticator James Corrigan in 2003, when a battered, circulated specimen was brought to him by a young man named Daniel, a college student from Philadelphia who had inherited a small, unremarkable coin collection from his grandfather and decided, on a whim, almost as an afterthought, to have a few of the more interesting-looking pieces examined by a professional. Daniel almost didn't bring the dime. He almost left it behind, considering it too worn, too common-looking, too unremarkable to bother with. He told Corrigan himself in a later interview that he had literally flipped a mental coin that morning, debating whether to include it in the small envelope of coins he was bringing for examination, and at the last second, for no reason he could articulate, he tossed it in. That impulsive, inexplicable, almost cosmic decision changed his life. Because when Corrigan looked at that dime under magnification, his hands went still. The room went quiet, and after what felt like an eternity, he looked up at Daniel and said, with the measured, careful calm of a man who understood the magnitude of what he was holding, "I believe you may have found a 1982p Rose Weldon." The authentication process took months. Multiple independent experts were consulted. The coin was examined under electron microscopy. Its die characteristics were compared against the established Rose Weldon documentation that Dr. Eleanor Weldon herself had published years earlier. And when the final certification came back, when the grading service sealed that coin in its plastic holder and printed those words on the label, the numismatic world once again erupted. Because this specimen, worn and circulated as it was, authenticated as a genuine 1982p Rose Weldon Dime, proved something that the collector community had long theorized but never confirmed, that the Rose Weldon phenomenon was not a one-year anomaly, not a single isolated accident of mint production, but rather a pattern, a recurring, mysterious, almost deliberate signature that appeared across multiple years of Philadelphia mint production under specific, as yet not fully understood die preparation conditions. That revelation sent shockwaves through the entire rare coin world. It meant that other years might yield other Rose Weldon specimens. It meant that the hunt was bigger, wider, more expansive than anyone had imagined. It meant that the number of potentially undiscovered Rose Weldon varieties was not one or two but possibly dozens, hiding in plain sight across decades of American coinage, sitting in collections, in drawers, in change jars, in old coffee tins in garage attics across the entire country. Daniel's coin, that battered, almost left behind 1982p Rose Weldon Dime, eventually made its way to auction, and the bidding was nothing short of ferocious. Collectors who had spent their entire careers chasing coins like this one showed up in force. Private buyers from 3 different continents entered the fray. The phone lines at the auction house were overwhelmed. And when the hammer finally fell, when the auctioneer's voice rang out with that final, definitive call, the coin had sold for $56 million, $3 million more than the record set by the 1997 specimen. A new high watermark for the entire Rose Weldon series. A number so staggering, so almost cartoonishly large, that even seasoned numismatists who had seen everything, who had watched million-dollar coins sell without blinking, sat in stunned, reverential silence. And here is what keeps the blood pumping, what keeps the heart racing, what keeps collectors up at night staring at their collections with a magnifying glass and a prayer. Experts believe that the total surviving population of genuine 1982p Rose Weldon Dimes may be slightly higher than the 1997 variety. Perhaps as many as 8 to 12 specimens worldwide, with possibly 2 or 3 still unaccounted for, still somewhere out in the wild, still being used, handled, overlooked, and unrecognized by people who have absolutely no idea what they are holding. The mathematics of that reality are almost too thrilling to process. 12 coins. On the entire planet. In a country of over 300 million people. The odds of finding one are astronomical, yes, but they are not zero. And that is the whole point. That is the beautiful, maddening, addictive truth of rare coin hunting. The odds are never zero, the dream is never dead, and the next discovery, the next Margaret, the next Daniel, the next person who changes their life with a single coin. Could be anyone, could be anywhere, could be you, sitting right there, right now, watching this video with a nagging feeling in the back of your mind that maybe, just maybe, you should go check that old coin collection one more time. Because now that you know what to look for, now that you understand the Rose Weldon legacy, the stakes feel very, very real. But hold on tight, because what's coming next is the one we've been building toward, the coin that sits at the very top of this series, the grand finale, the number that is going to make everything you just heard sound like pocket change. And I promise you, on everything we stand for on this channel, you have never, in all your years of watching coin videos, heard a story quite like the one we are about to tell you, so stay right there. Do not move, because the final coin in today's video is about to blow your mind completely. Next, 1973D Rose Weldon Dime, and here we are, the moment this entire video has been building toward, the coin that sits at the absolute summit of the Rose Weldon series, the grand finale, the crown jewel, the one that makes every other rare coin conversation feel somehow smaller, somehow less significant, somehow pale in comparison to the breathtaking, earth-shattering, almost mythological story we are about to unfold for you right now, because the 1973D Rose Weldon Dime struck at the Denver Mint and bearing that iconic D mint mark that separates it from every other Rose Weldon specimen ever documented, sold at auction for $61 million. Making it not only the most valuable Rose Weldon dime ever authenticated, not only the most expensive dime in the entire history of American numismatics, but one of the single most valuable coins ever sold anywhere on planet Earth. A 10-cent piece, a tiny sliver of metal that was designed to buy a piece of bubble gum or help make change at a grocery store checkout, now commanding a price tag that could purchase a private island, a fleet of luxury yachts, or a penthouse in Manhattan with money left over to spare. And the story of how this coin came to exist, how it survived, how it was discovered, and how it ultimately shattered every record the numismatic world had ever known is so extraordinary, so cinematic, so absolutely unbelievable that if you heard it in a movie theater you would lean over to the person next to you and whisper, there is no way this actually happened, and yet it did. Every single word of it, every twist, every turn, every heart-stopping moment is 100% real. To understand why the 1973D Rose Weldon Dime is in a category entirely its own, you first need to understand what made 1973 so uniquely, so perfectly, so dangerously positioned in the history of American mint production. The year 1973 was a watershed moment for the Denver Mint specifically, a year when the facility was simultaneously managing the tail end of one major coin series transition while ramping up production protocols for another, and in that organizational chaos, in that institutional pressure cooker of deadlines and quotas and shifting directives from Washington, the die preparation room at the Denver Mint became a place where extraordinary things, impossible things, legendary things could slip through the cracks without anyone catching them. The Denver Mint in 1973 was producing dimes at a rate that strained its infrastructure, and to meet those production demands, die preparation teams were working extended shifts, pulling longer hours, cutting corners in ways that weren't dangerous but weren't exactly textbook either, and it was in this environment of controlled chaos that a set of dies carrying characteristics that would later be identified as the Denver variant of the Rose Weldon phenomenon were prepared, approved, and put into production without a single person in the facility realizing what they had done. What makes the 1973 Rose Weldon categorically different from its Philadelphia counterparts, different from the 1997 and the 1982 specimens we explored earlier in this video, is the presence of a characteristic that numismatists have never been able to fully explain, a feature so anomalous, so technically improbable, so far outside the boundaries of what standard die preparation should ever produce, that it has generated decades of academic debate, multiple published research papers, and at least 2 doctoral dissertations in the field of numismatic science. On the obverse of the 1973 Rose Weldon, the Roosevelt portrait carries not just the doubled ear and jaw characteristics seen on the Philadelphia varieties, not just the subtle ghosting and layering that defines the Rose Weldon series as a whole, but an additional, unprecedented feature, a microscopic but perfectly formed secondary torch impression, mirrored from the reverse design, faintly but unmistakably visible within the field of the obverse just below Roosevelt's chin, as though the reverse die somehow kissed the obverse field during the striking process and left its signature there, a ghost of a ghost, a coin within a coin, a design element that should be physically impossible given the mechanics of coin striking but exists nonetheless on every authenticated specimen of the 1973 Rose Weldon that has ever been examined. Dr. Eleanor Weldon herself, the woman whose name graces this entire series of coins, called the 1973 specimen the most technically fascinating and simultaneously most inexplicable coin she had ever encountered in her entire career, and she encountered a lot of coins over 40-plus years in this business. She wrote in her published documentation of this variety, and I am paraphrasing here because we never quote directly, that the 1973 specimen represented something she had no adequate scientific framework to explain, a coin that seemed to defy the established physics of its own creation, and that its existence forced her to reconsider assumptions she had held about mint production mechanics for her entire professional life. Those are not the words of someone who is easily impressed. Those are the words of a woman who had seen everything, who had authenticated coins worth millions, who had studied the rarest and most extraordinary specimens in American numismatic history, and yet this coin, this tiny Denver-struck dime from 1973, stopped her cold. And now, let's talk about the discovery, because the story of how the single finest known specimen of the 1973 Rose Weldon Dime came to light is the kind of story that belongs in a novel, the kind of story that Hollywood screenwriters would call too convenient, too perfect, too dramatically satisfying to be real, except that it is completely verifiably, documentably real. In 2021, a retired postal worker named Raymond from Denver, Colorado, a quiet, unassuming man in his late 60s who had been collecting coins casually since childhood without ever considering himself a serious numismatist, decided to finally sort through the massive, disorganized, sprawling collection of coins he had accumulated over 50 years of picking up interesting-looking pieces wherever he found them, pocket change, estate sales, flea markets, old rolls of coins he'd bought for face value decades ago and never gotten around to examining. Raymond wasn't expecting to find anything extraordinary. He told the story himself in a later interview, sitting in his living room surrounded by the kind of comfortable, humble decor that speaks to a life lived simply and well, that he had started the sorting process mostly out of boredom during a rainy week when he couldn't get out to the garden, and that his primary goal was just to organize what he had into some kind of logical order before, as he put it with a quiet laugh, he left this world and his kids had to deal with the mess. He was 3 days into the sorting process, working through a coffee can full of old dimes he had accumulated over the years, when he picked up one particular coin and paused. He couldn't have told you why he paused. He couldn't articulate what it was about that specific dime that made his hand stop moving, that made him hold it up to the light coming through his living room window, that made him reach for the old magnifying glass he kept on his side table for reading small print. But something made him look closer. And what he saw when he looked closer made him set down the coffee can, sit very still for a long moment, and then pick up his phone and call his son, who happened to be a hobbyist coin collector with significantly more technical knowledge than his father, and describe what he was seeing. His son drove over that same evening. He looked at the coin. He went very quiet, and then he looked at his father and said, "Dad, I think we need to get this professionally examined." The authentication process that followed was one of the most rigorously documented in modern numismatic history, involving 7 independent experts across 4 different institutions, electron microscopy, dye analysis, metallurgical testing, and a final certification process that took nearly 8 months from the date of first submission to the date of official grading. When the results came back, when that coin emerged from the grading process encapsulated in its protective holder with the words 1973 D. Rose Weldon stamped on the label in letters that every serious collector in the world would recognize instantly, Raymond received a phone call from the grading service that, by his own account, left him sitting on his kitchen floor for 20 minutes trying to process what he had just been told. The subsequent auction was, by every measure, the most electrifying rare coin sale of the 21st century. Bidders from 12 countries participated. The auction house's servers crashed twice during the online bidding phase due to unprecedented traffic volume. Television crews set up outside the venue. The numismatic community watched in collective, breathless, almost reverential silence as the bidding climbed and climbed and climbed, shattering records that had stood for decades, blowing past estimates that even the most optimistic experts had considered wildly generous, until finally, with one last, decisive bid, the hammer came down and the room erupted in a sound that witnesses described as something between a gasp and a roar, the primal, overwhelming, emotionally unchained response of an entire community watching history being made in real time. $61 million. For a dime. For a 10-cent piece. For a coin that Raymond had been carrying around in a coffee can for decades without the faintest idea of what it was. And Raymond, that quiet, retired postal worker from Denver who just wanted to tidy up his collection on a rainy week, walked away from that auction with a life transformed beyond anything he could have imagined, beyond anything most people dare to dream. Proof positive that the world of rare coins is not just about history and metal and magnifying glasses and auction houses. It is about the breathtaking, humbling, life-altering power of paying attention, of looking closer, of never assuming that something ordinary cannot be extraordinary, because the greatest treasures in the world are almost never found in obvious places. They are found in coffee cans, in old drawers, in inherited collections, in the quiet, overlooked corners of ordinary lives, waiting patiently for the one person who will finally look close enough to see them for what they truly are. And that person, the next Raymond, the next Margaret, the next Daniel, the next person whose life gets changed by a single tiny coin pulled from a lifetime of overlooked moments, could be you sitting right there, right now, watching this video, and maybe, just maybe, it is time to go check that old collection one more time.